Chef Patchwai. And today we have a guest with us, and we want to have some insight about violence prevention regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, as well as what is happening with other factors that can contribute to violence, including trafficking. Again, this topic can be sensitive and triggering. At the end of the show, we'll give some resources in case you need to talk to somebody. Welcome to this episode of War Cry Podcast. We're an all-native run podcast discussing data, events, stories, issues, and historical connections about Northwest missing and murdered Natives. We are located on the Yakima Reservation, and we want to thank you for joining us for this episode. We are live streaming during the noon hour Pacific time. My name is Emily Washings, and co-hosts today are Patsy Whitefoot, Robin Peebushy, and Lucy Smartlowit. Our guest today is Ihs Cuestas from the National Violence Prevention Resource Center. One of the announcements I'm going to give today is actually about a previous case from 2016, but it's somebody that always sticks out in my mind around this time. This is Frida Jane Knows His Gun, also known as Frida Knows Gun, who went missing 5 years ago in a Kennewick, Washington Walmart on October 18th, 2016. And the reason why she sticks out, especially during this time of year, is that she was reported to have been trying to get home to take her kids trick-or-treating. And, as a mother myself, this is a big time for kids and their holidays and traditions. And so I always think about that story and her intention, which is to get home. This information about her family and her sisters trying to have their spirit speak to her spirit comes from a 2019 Billings Gazette article written by Tom Lutey. At the time that she went missing, she was 34 years old. Her current age would be 39. She is 150 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. An area she could be missing is Billings, Montana, or Kennewick, Washington. That is Washington State. And if you have information, please contact the Bureau of Indian Affairs at 406-638-2631. Again, it's 406-638-2631. Her NamUs missing person number is 36684. And just a note for those of you that were on our Washington State Patrol list, missing person list episode, she currently is not listed as missing on the Washington State Patrol missing persons list. So she is under Montana. If you remember with our interview with Ellie, she did share a chart in which she had Frida Knows His Gun on there. So she is recorded in Montana. She is not recorded in Washington. And I want to actually turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves and the organization they represent. Again, this conversation, oh my gosh, I have the world's biggest fly, sorry. This conversation is a lot like, if we were at a diner talking to our guest and they, and you were, I don't want to say fly on the wall, but that's just on my mind right now because there's this buzzing around me. I don't want to reduce our audience to flies, but let's say you're at the table next to us and you're overhearing our conversation. So again, we know this topic is triggering. We know it's hard for a lot of members of our audience to hear this level, but we do like to bring a coffee style conversation into this very heavy and big topic. So Ihs, go ahead and let us know who you are and some of your background.
Ihs Cuestas with the National Violence Prevention Resource Center. Previously was a case detective for the Tucson Police Department in their street gang unit, where I had the opportunity to work gang activity for 18 of my 25 years. Subsequently became a member of a federal hardcore addiction team, where I was the lead detective of cases with regards to violence and and gangs throughout the southwest part of the United States, and also was able to satellite throughout pretty much the country in doing training, because there was such a demand for trained individuals to go into communities to do awareness empowerment trainings and work with other agencies to help them to become active in addressing some of the community violence that they were dealing with, and subsequently their gang problems. So I had tremendous opportunities set my direction, and I got the opportunity to do a lot of training. I developed a lot of programs, training programs. I think I have about 32 of them now that I have, that goes all the way from bullying all the way to Mmiw and gang prevention and truancy reduction and things of that nature. And one of the things I learned when I was very young in law enforcement was that I just didn't want to be someone that would feed the revolving door of criminal behavior in our country. I wanted to do more with what I knew in my experience. So I really started getting involved in prevention and community connection to addressing some of the root causes. Because number one, I got tired of investigating the symptoms, because that's all we were doing, was being responsive to the symptoms, and we were chasing shootings. So we'd go from one shooting to another shooting, from a homicide to another homicide, and we never really addressed the underlying root causes. And I started asking those questions of our community: and what could we do, and what did you want from us, and what could we change in the way that we delivered our criminal justice system to our environment. And it really started opening some opportunities for our community to make some differences. So I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed it. I like seeing people's lives turned around, and seeing young people's lives become productive, and dealing with individuals that had tragedy. And I can tell you that I haven't met a criminal offender yet that didn't have a negative upbringing or a risk factors in their home or their community that contributed to their behavior. So, and we need to look at the picture holistically. And I really enjoy doing that this is my 42nd year of doing prevention and intervention and violence and crime reduction throughout the country. And I like that better than I did doing the investigative detective work, although it seems to be an upsurge in quality, needing quality investigators again. So that's my background. I started working in tribal communities in 1996 as a result of a criminal investigation I was doing in southern Arizona, and found out that there was just so many differences between tribal lands and non-tribal lands when it came to responding to criminal behavior. And I really took on accepting some of those challenges and helping tribal communities address those. I actually developed a program called CRIPS, which is Gang Reduction Through Intervention, Prevention, and Suppression, that I authored and put together, and had it evaluated by the Department of Justice, and received the best practice to work with tribal communities to deliver this multifaceted strategy. So I've really learned from every aspect of addressing violence in tribal communities, and I enjoy working with communities across the country. So that's pretty much what I'm still doing at this particular point in time in my life, and watching my grandkids grow up.
Great. I appreciate you sharing your range of resources. And, before we started, our team was already asking all the questions. We do go in our age order, so I'll turn it over to Robin for our first question.
Hello, Christopher. Thank you again so much for joining us. I've just heard so many great things about you and your knowledge. So I'm really honored that you're here to be able to speak with us. Also, you sound like a very busy person. So again, I'm glad you're here. So the main question, I guess, that's on my mind is, we spoke a little bit before we started recording about what different parts of the country look like and how they approach Mmiw and Mmip cases or issues, epidemic essentially that has been going on. But I would like to know from what your experience has either with the Northwest or with the Yakima Valley in general, what does that look like? What are contributing factors to MMIW and MMIP cases?
I think there's a lot of challenges, and I think that there's some factors that I think challenge the individual that is actually responsive to the case itself. And I think first and foremost is dialogue between agencies. It's such a challenge for networking. When you come from a metropolitan community, you dialogue and communication is a given. But when you work with other agencies, you see that there is really a reluctance to share information and knowledge and databases. And I know that you mentioned Ihs as one of the databases that is used in the Pacific Northwest, but there are so many other databases that tribal agencies still haven't had the ability to access. There's one called TAP, which is Tribal Access Program, which basically TAP, some tribal law enforcement agencies have it, and some tribal law enforcement agencies don't have it. And what that does is that you're able to get an idea of services that a tribal member has used or is used, and when was the last opportunity that they used those resources, like when they last paid their rent, when they last paid their utilities, when they last had their gas turned off and things of that nature, or their cell phone service still in use, and things of that nature that kind of feed the investigator to look for leads and opportunities to be able to, because what it comes down to when you're working MMIW, MMI cases is establishing the last known contact and the anticipated direction or the anticipated path that the victim was headed towards. And then in between those 2 points, you have to establish a timeline. Where could they possibly have gotten from the time that you last lost contact with them to where you believe they were headed? And then you start working on that timeline and contacts and family and individuals and friends and associates, and try to close that web. So the more information you receive to get that knowledge of access to resources, the more likely, like knowing when they last made a withdrawal from the ATM card, or somebody made a withdrawal from their bank account. That information it closes that window even further and gives you more of an opportunity to kind of be more targeted in your investigation and target your resources. But the challenges that I'm finding in working with tribal communities is a lot of tribes are very secretive with exchanging that information out to the public and into law enforcement. You don't see that there's there's no protocol in place from tribe to tribe on we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if someone is turned up missing or the family has had no contact within that person. And what's the time frame before we could consider that person at risk? There's not a protocol. And what I see tribes trying to do, as I see tribes trying to establish their own MMIW, MIP task force, but it has to begin to move in the direction of wanting resources and protocols and processes and policies in place. I totally support the Indigenous women's movement to recognize the issue and to get attention to it. But it's at the point, in my opinion, it's at the point now where we have to start holding people accountable for why do we still have these challenges? Why do we not? Why does the federal law enforcement not speak to local law enforcement? Why does it take anywhere from 10 to 15 days to write a police report and to get that police report into a recognized database? Which database do we have access to? And some of these databases, the tribal law enforcement or BIA law enforcement, they just don't want to pay the fee to access the database. It's the same with a cell phone. An example of that is to crack a cell phone is what we call it. To crack a cell phone, basically download all the data from a cell phone. It costs a crime lab that has to do that, or someone that has the technology, anywhere between $1,000 to $2,500 to do that. But some departments just don't want to pay the money because they don't have it in their budget. So they don't, until the case becomes a federal case, whatever constitutes a federal case, then they use access to federal crime labs, right? That is paid by the taxpayer. Then they will open that cell phone and find out what data is in there that's relevant to their investigation. And in the meantime, we could lose, the trail could go completely cold because they chose not to pay that money to have that phone opened and accessed. It's the same thing with the database. And databases are kind of lifelines to criminal investigations.
What was the cost of the cell phone fee?
I've seen it everywhere from $1,500 to $2,500 to download data, to have someone, so that is a technician, download the data accurately, because you just don't want to give it to a patrol officer that has the software in his computer because they don't know what they're looking for. They're just going to dump everything. But you want somebody that knows how to work with the software and specific to your timeline that you're looking for. And then you also have to remember that you have to get the cell phone, meaning that someone in the family has to be in a position to, surrender that cell phone. And some families won't do that. Some families refuse to do that because there's a lot of distrust in investigative resources, and I don't blame them.
Robin, do you have a response?
That's a lot to take in, and it just makes us all, yeah, Lucy's like, yes. Makes us all realize that, yeah, the culmination of just our seasons and just asking questions really kind of gives us a lot of those same, conclusions. And a lot of the times, I think just as a tribal member, having those criticisms sometimes of where tribes are or where law enforcement agencies are, we always try to be diplomatic. But I know sometimes it just needs to be said that, like, we know we're all working, but we definitely need more action on this. And so thank you so much for kind of generalizing and summarizing kind of how we feel and from what we've seen and observed.
And that's my point. That's my point of view. If we could just get action on issues, if we had I trained law enforcement, and I supervised law enforcement, and there was some instances where I had to give them a checklist on what I expected them to accomplish on a case and bring that case back to me as the supervisor to determine that everything was done appropriately in order for a decision to be made on that case. Well, that doesn't exist in tribal lands, and it doesn't exist with some of these agencies that we believe are responsible to investigate our lost loved ones. They kind of do it on their own and on a whim, and what they think is, there's no playbook. And if we could just get every tribe to have a protocol and a process on what the minimum steps are required for this type of investigation, and make sure that every one of those, even though these cases are astronomical with regards to numbers, we need to go back and ensure that all those steps were taken on all of those cold cases. And I, for one, and I'm sure you are the same way, I grow frustrated with the fact that, well, we can't tell you anything because the case is, quote, under investigation, which in my opinion is nonsense, because the case is just sitting there, meaning no one is doing anything with it. What harm is it going to do by releasing information that is vital for the community to get involved? It should.
Pause on that, Chris. Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. That ties into like an ongoing question that we've had on this podcast from several guests, and I want to make sure to recap this appropriately using your 42 years of expertise. So what Chris is describing is when family members, including family members of homicide or that are being investigated, missing that are presumed dead, when they ask for updates from the federal government about their cases, the response is often, we do not comment on ongoing investigations.
Right.
Family members frequently see this. It is a frustration and a call from families to just give updates. Let us know that somebody's on it. And so Chris is really recapping that at a really high skill level. So I just I just want to recap it for some of our audience that are just chewing their sandwich and trying to take it all in.
Well, what I have suggested, Emily, and I'm sorry to interrupt, what I have suggested to tribes that I've worked with is that establish a resolution on what your expectations are from your U.S. Attorney's Office when it comes to your cold cases, and expect and request or demand, if you need a better word, demand an update on what is the case status of our loved one. Where is that now? And then what do you need? What are you missing in this case to reopen and reinvestigate that particular investigative lead? But to leave them in a box cold in a warehouse somewhere is not doing the family or the community any good, because these communities need closure and the families need closure. So sitting on the fact that it's under investigation you can move past that. It's stubbornness. It's stubbornness and it's just reluctance. And the tribes can push forward by resolution, having the U.S. attorney or file an order to show cause. Why can't we have more information on our loved one that has been missing for 25 years? What is it going to hurt the investigation by giving us some information? And the other thing that I would request, if you're going to do that, also ask that case be resubmitted for using new technology, for DNA, for ballistics, for evidence, for hair, for fiber. That technology is ongoing all the time. There's new updates and upgrades. I just read something today on Chief Sitting Bull's family using new technology to determine ancestry, but it's brand new technology. Is this new technology being used with all these old cold cases? And I would venture to say probably not. So,
yeah, we on that note, we just had the exhumation of an unidentified woman that was found on the Yakima Reservation in 1988. So that's 33 years ago. She had not had DNA taken, and that just took place. That process just started again a couple weeks ago. So that's a really good, those are very fancy terms and process, and I really like the proactive aspects of it. And I want to hear why we talked about, you talked about whether or not a case goes federal. And in the Yakima Nation, it's really confusing to see why there's a federal reward for a missing persons case, sometimes up to $10,000. But for other missing persons cases, there's no, it doesn't seem to have an FBI involvement. It seems to stay with the tribe as lead enforcement, and there's no reward. We see another case with Talela of a $10,000 reward. What are those factors? And if they're unknown, can you recap that a little bit for us about what do you know about why they're choosing certain cases to have rewards?
Well, the issue is, and I researched this for my webinar that I did for the Ihs Conference. The issue is that there's certain tribes have acquiesced to the state with regards to jurisdiction. And there's longstanding treaties that have language that says that the federal government may investigate certain crimes in tribal lands. Now, being a lifelong law enforcement officer, May tells me that I don't have to do it, or May tells me that I have options. And if I get a case that doesn't look solvable, or if I get a case that doesn't look like I'm going to have cooperation from the family or the tribe, I can, under the May umbrella, I can send that case to a different jurisdiction within the state to manage it instead of having to, under shall, investigate all violent crime or all Mmiw, MIP cases in tribal lands. I had I found a video from a professor from Montana that did a really good job explaining it. She explained jurisdiction and she explained the layers of jurisdiction. And she showed a graphic of all of these dwindling connections of lines and said that if any of those lines are severed, the case gets dissolved. It doesn't go anywhere. And that's because of the state's agreement, the treaties, and the federal government's agreement with the tribes themselves. So, and I can easily copy that and send it to you if you want to use it or view it. But it was very good, and it really opened some ideas it gave some concepts to me. And there's another video called Broken Promises that comes from Montana, and it talks about the problem with their jurisdiction, where the states have the rights to determine whether they can investigate certain cases or not. So they basically have the ability to pick and choose. And I'm assuming that's what's happening to some of these cases that are driving tribal communities crazy, is that they've decided which case they want to work in, which case they don't want to work. Where when I was doing my cases, I had no choice. I had to work all of the cases and try to bring justice to all of the families. But that's different in a municipality than it is federal level, because there's so many layers of jurisdictions. So that's probably the best answer I can give you, is that the treaties and the policies and the jurisdictional challenges outweigh but the environment and the atmosphere and the types of cases have changed. So I think we as community members and tribal members and tribes, we need to address those issues. Remember, I talked about earlier about we need to start looking for solutions and answers within these layers of challenges. That's one of the questions that I think need to be resolved, is how do we address this jurisdictional issue where people don't have the ability to acquiesce on some of these cases. To me, that would be a priority, especially now, because we have this issue at the forefront. So let's look for some challenges and some changes, and let's address these issues now, because unfortunately the climate's not changing. I wish I could tell you the climate is changing, but it's not. You have the trafficking industry that's cartel driven and driven by multinational criminal organizations, and they see the profitability and the revenue stream by trafficking ladies and men and two-spirit individuals. And the fact that you have all of these, there's a disadvantage for law enforcement right now. And that unless we can close that window, one of the things you just talked about was jurisdiction. Unless we can close that window relatively quickly, then they're going to continue to have and then they're using full advantage of technology. If there was something that I could do personally, is to explain to the tribes how technology plays into the trafficking challenge in tribal lands, because technology is crazy and it's so advanced for parents and community members where our kids are being trafficked and addressed. I saw a graphic the other day that 72% of 11 to 13-year-olds receive a troll once every 3 days by a predator, just on their phone from a known predator in their region.
Wow, that's a staggering, that's a jaw-dropping statistic. And
that's scary. It's so scary.
I appreciate your insight. I mean, having like a athletic background and being in so many sports, you just have this coach voice. And for those of you that are new to missing and murdered Indigenous women and the multi-jurisdictional issues, we don't even know what game we're playing. We don't have any rule book for how to do this. When families have questions, there's no like set process in where to go. And so, Chris, you have a very good coaching of giving us some answers and steps. I want to turn it over to my co-host Lucy for her question.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
I have so many questions, and I'm trying to be very diplomatic in my initial reactions to some of the things that I'm hearing. But I would be actually curious to hear from you a little bit more about how technology plays into human trafficking and what human trafficking things we need to be aware of here in the Pacific Northwest, and more specifically on the Yakima Reservation, because my understanding is that you have been here before and done some trainings. And so I'm just really curious to hear what type of things you've observed, any statistics that you may know of, and so forth.
Yeah, I do have data because I try to make my presentations data driven instead of experiential, which a lot of times people conflict with, which is fine with me. But unfortunately, what I saw was, number one, is the region has a significant gang problem, and the Yakima tribe is right in the middle of some at least 6 very hostile gangs that don't like each other, and those gangs are connected to criminal organizations and criminal enterprises, and the Mexican mafia and the Western Familia are the 2 prison gang / cartels that are calling the shots for the street gang members. And remember, those organizations are not only connected to the cartels in Mexico, but they're also connected to the prison systems. So they have a wide range of ability to impact the region. One of your challenges is that you have a transient population because of the climate and the industry, which is agricultural, and because it's a labor-driven industry, you have a lot of individuals that can come in for short periods of time, and even if 1 or 2 generations of that family are there for the industry or for agriculture, you are going to have some individuals that are going to engage in some of the local dynamics of the gang subculture. So, and that unfortunately still is locked in the issue of drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and criminal intimidation for the purposes of territory control. And that's where a lot of your criminal engagement comes from, is it's territorial control, because they want to control different sides of the tracks. Literally in Yakima, they want to control different sides of the tracks, and all of your train signaling boxes are identified that way. You have the gangs that are saying, this is our area, you stay out of here, and on the backside of that has, this is our area, you stay out of here. And the problem is, and the challenge is that you have a certain percentage of your tribal youth that will believe that they have to participate in that behavior because of camaraderie, friendships, relationships, relatives, or even the fact that they are at a high risk family with loss of cultural identity. So they begin this vision quest to look for identity, and the street identity is one that's prevalent, and it gives them a sense of power, especially when you begin to see the control over the certain communities, and also you see the influence of weapons. That's one of the things that really disturbed me, was when I went on, and I'll give you one of my secrets. When I started creeping on Facebook for all of the Yakima kids, I found so many displays of handguns that these kids were readily posing. And there was a couple of kids that were gunshot wound victims, and they were showing their gunshot holes that were still filled with gauze from when they went to get medical treatment. So that to me tells me that there's already a mentality that it's okay to engage in that type of behavior. So high speed, that after a while, the territorial challenges are not enough for them. So they start getting involved in criminal enterprise behavior. And one of those criminal enterprise behaviors is drug trafficking and human trafficking, sex trafficking, because those are revenue streams that are available to the black market. And that's what they look for. So is there a couple of things that have to be prevalent in that community in order for that revenue stream to be present? Number one, trucking, the trucking industry. And you know as well as I do that you cannot move those crops from point A to point B unless you have a large amount of trucking. The second thing is areas of concentration where there's revenue, and gaming is one of those areas. So you can go into an area, you can either you can clean dirty money or turn money over, money laundering, or you can begin to use that as a point of recruitment. And I witnessed that when I was there. I saw some people, some Mexican nationals that thought I was Native American, which is fine. I'm half. They were communicating with each other. I understood every word that they were saying. And what they were doing was they were pointing out girls to each other at the casino. They're pointing out girls and wanting to connect with them or possibly target them or see if they had any interest in anything that they had to offer. And they do it through coercion. There's only 3 ways to traffic a person: coercion, promise, and violence. Those are the only 3 ways that a female gets indoctrinated into the trafficking industry. But remember, this is very lucrative for a criminal organization. The average prostitute that is involved in a criminal enterprise, they can make up to $140,000 a year. So the more you get into your stable, the more profit you bring into the organization, because they're connected to cartels and they're connected to Nuestra Familia and Mexican Mafia. They have to kick up a tax anywhere from 10 to 20%. So whatever they make, they have to kick that up to the cartel and the criminal organization that they are umbrellaed under. So that's part of how the revenue and the profit goes forward. So and then of course the drug trade, unfortunately it's a clear shot. That's one of the challenges, is this highway trafficking of narcotics that comes in from point A to point B. The narcotics are not from the Yakima tribe. They're imported. It's an imported product. So what has to happen is the community, tribe, whatever you want to call it, they have to come up with an interdiction strategy to begin to interdict that, whether it's getting your canines to search the PO boxes or have the canines search the Amtrak that's coming in or the trucks, or do roadblocks on the highway systems, or have more of an active strategy in place to begin to do interdiction, because it's coming from different points to the Yakima tribe. But that has to be a strategic plan. And then I think the tribe, in my opinion, needed to have codes in place with regards to gang activity, and then how the tribe is going to respond to that criminal activity committed by both tribal and non-tribal members. Because if you sit back and allow them, they don't have any problem establishing dominance. That has been the way of the criminal enterprise forever. So, and it's, like I said, it's a money-making organization now. So I hope that answers some of your questions. Or I made things worse for you.
Well, it did bring a lot more questions that I want to ask, but I want to be mindful of our viewers and also our other co-hosts. So I want to transition this over to Patsy and to see if she has any questions about what you've gone over, or any new questions that she may have.
I just wanted to find out, Robin, if there are any viewer questions. Okay. All right. So
Don't be afraid of me. Go ahead and ask questions. Now's your time. One of the things that I tell people when I do my conferences is that I have answered every question pretty much having to do with trafficking, violence, gang activity, drug interdiction. So I've been there and done that. So I do the best I can. Don't be afraid of me.
so for our viewers, how long ago were you here? And then also, is the conference that was held with the Indian Health Service available nationally for viewing as well?
It was
And
through,
who did you work with when you were here?
I worked with the substance abuse program, and they brought me in 2 years ago in, I believe it was March. And we did a 3-day conference. We did gang prevention for 2 days, and we did sex trafficking empowerment training the 3rd day. And we had a full house every one of those days. It was really impressive. I know we set it up for like 80, and we had over 100 both days. And we had people that came down from Spokane, Seattle, Warm Springs, and all over the region, which I thought was really, really cool. So, but there was a follow-up to that. What was supposed to happen was I spent 10 days in your community. The 3 days were just the training. The other 7 days was my assessment. I committed those days to doing an assessment of the region and developing a assessment of what I saw were the risk factors, and then also a strategic plan on how to be responsive to those risk factors, and subsequently that action plan for the tribal community. We never got to that because COVID kind of just came in and made some changes. And so I was scheduled to go before council to present my findings, but it never happened. And subsequently, I had requests for training. Still in existence right now. And the IHS conference was put on by the University of Nebraska, and that was an online virtual conference. And that was just last month. And there was over 450 people that signed up from tribes across the country. And that was a 4-day conference. I had 1 day session. I was the keynote. There was 3 keynotes. I was the first keynote, and the first session was on why tribal women and girls are at risk for sex trafficking in tribal lands. And the second session was street drug identification and responses for community members, parents, and tribal communities. Which is unfortunately the fentanyl challenge right now in tribal lands is really, the synthetic fentanyl is really a problem, and coming up with responses to that. And I had the trafficking session. I had 393 people attend, which they said has never happened before. And then the drug session, I had 273 people attend. So, and it was recorded, and it's on the, one of the co-sponsor was the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board, and they recorded it both. They recorded all 4 days. And we had a Q&A after every session, which was a lot of fun, a lot of really good, solid, strong questions. But when I did I did street drugs that are prevalent right now, that a lot of community members are asking questions about. Everything from synthetic fentanyl all the way down to whipped cream that a lot of kids are inhaling, unfortunately. And we talked about not just what it looks like nomenclature, but what the symptoms that parents and community members are going to probably see. And also we talked about where to search in their homes and how kids conceal those types of items in the home as well. And then the steps they can take in 3 stages as either a parent, a program member, or a tribal leader to address those issues. So that was where we did that was the one that was 273 people. I actually had that presentation ready to deliver for your tribe as well, but because of my challenges with contractual, then never went anywhere. So, but I still have the presentation. I have that one and sex trafficking presentation ready to be available as soon as we get something figured out. But I might still be waiting another year from now. I don't know.
Okay, I did have a question. I just wanted to get to this information, make it available for the audience. But there was a question that Emily's asking, what was the age range of trafficking at our casino? What did you observe to be the age range?
Well, unfortunately, we're seeing that age range go down. And I think right now the target age is 11 to 14. What I was seeing was probably 18 and above. So I'd say probably 18 to 21, the girls that I was concerned about. And I pointed them out to security, and I brought to their attention and told them how they're probably communicating. But, one of the issues, and I found this and I used this in my presentation, is that there's some data that came out that said that 72% of tribal girls that are targeted will leave the reservation to meet the predator. They agree to meet that predator, which is very startling. That's really unfortunate. So that tells you that they're looking for identity and looking for connection. They're looking for some type of support and love in their lives, and will pursue those contacts even knowing that there's a risk. So that's unfortunate. But and then one of the other things I told the audience, and I would say here as well, is that parents, there's probably 10 different apps that you can load to track your kids' cell phones that I would highly suggest, because you can. There's some of it that's pretty advanced. That if there is a suspicious or unknown connection, you can terminate the contact from your phone without your son or daughter knowing. So.
So thank you so much. That's a lot of information. And like everyone said, we had a lot of questions, but trying to be mindful of our time and your time as well. So in your discussion with people around our area, we've had a number of women over the years who have been missing. And historically, there has been discussion, and it's also been noted that there has been a serial killer here, or serial killers. We don't know, but in my case, my sister's been missing over 30 years in the closed area of the reservation. And there's really not been good law enforcement response to that. And so when Emily talked about the Parker Doe case, we went to see the place where this woman was located, and I also just shared information with the coroner as well. They called me to ask me if it could be my sister, and I said no, and I continued to follow up with them. And then I've also gotten phone calls from other state patrol offices of missing women who've been missing over the years. And so, I'm wondering if, what do you know, what can be done with women who've been missing, such as the one we just talked about with the Parker Doe? What recommendations do you have for families, for those that have been missing many years? And in the case of my sister, she was missing, and her personal items were found in the closed area of the reservation. And I've talked about this publicly and also to the media. Those that have access to the closed part of the reservation, of course, are tribal members. The logging industry. There's a heavy logging industry here, as well as law enforcement. And then in addition to that, we have non-natives that come onto the reservation in a closed area as well. And I've experienced that just because I live here at the foothills of the mountains, seeing Mexican people coming out of the reservation who were lost, didn't even know where they were. They didn't even know where they were at. And I just happen to, drive around sometimes because I'm right near the mountains, but I don't go too far. So, yeah.
That's, first of all, I can't tell you how sad that makes me feel that you have not gotten any closure on your missing loved one. I just can't imagine what feelings you and your family deal with on a regular basis. What I would do, I would start by contacting someone, an attorney or someone that does pro bono work. And there may be even attorneys now. I was reading under this, the Montana Mmiw task force has some pro bono attorneys, and I would ask to file an order to show cause. And an order to show cause basically is order before the courts. You might even want to connect that to under the Freedom of Information Act. You can ask to have the case file reopened so that you can review it. And if they need to redact information, let them redact information, but at least you'll get some idea of where the case went and where they dropped it and where they stopped following up on. And then begin to try to see if there's little opportunities where you can get some questions answered. They have to release the certain reports to you that are not covered under the confidentiality umbrella under the Freedom of Information Act. Community members do that all across the country all the time. So that's one thing that I would do is file within the court system to try to view the file and see if the file denotes the actual progress that they said they did or didn't do in the case. Yeah. And then if there's any chance that since her property was recovered, for the resubmission of that property into a laboratory of some type to see if you can recover any forensic evidence from that personal property, if they release that personal property to the family. And then I would, one of the reasons that we were able to find this one young lady a couple of weeks ago was Facebook, just using social media. I mean, the family was so upset, they just said, forget the police department, let's just do this ourselves. So, and what they did was they did like just an advertisement flooding of Facebook of a flyer of their loved one for any additional leads or any information. And then we luckily found the license. They found the license plate number. And when they got that license plate number, they started contacting people to, if they knew who the vehicle was, who it belonged to, things of that nature. So look for vehicles as well. If you have a car, if there's a car involved, and you need some information on the car, law enforcement is reluctant to release that to you. Carfax does a really good job of tracking maintenance of vehicles. That's how we found the white van in California, was through Carfax. So those are some things that I would suggest you look into, and just try to get some reports released to you so that you can begin to ask those more pointed questions. And that's one of the challenges, in my opinion, is we need to get away from this general questions and get into, why didn't this person do this with my loved one's case, and come up with an explanation. And don't stop just because they're retired. There's still accountability and responsibility. And I think, in my opinion, and this might upset your viewers, but my opinion is one of the reasons why a lot of these MMIW cases are just closed and stored because of inappropriate law enforcement techniques, investigative techniques. And they don't want to go back and open those cases and found out that the law enforcement official did a bad job, because that's going to open a whole new can of worms, and they don't want to do that. But if we want to solve this, there's got to be transparency. There has to be transparency. If that person didn't do their job, there needs to be accountability, because it's our loved ones that are missing, not yours. So, we want answers to those questions, specific questions. And if you have problems drafting those specific questions, give me a call. I'll tell you what you can ask. If they say, well, the case is this, and this, and I can give you some specific questions to ask. They might not like it, but oh well.
And I was going to try to be general in the question I was going to ask, but I thought this is, a situation that's been going on for many years. And it's not just my sister, but it's other women who were found in our closed area of the reservation who were killed, and the remains were located in the mountains as well. So, and other women missing. And, there are so many stories. I'm not going to share them all, but I just want to be able to, again, help families. And as I've said before, every family member responds to this in different ways. And, this is an ongoing issue, but I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us in an open manner. And I especially am appreciative of holding one another accountable, particularly if you're going into this field. And I was just curious about your background. What education was your background, or was the education the School of Hard Knocks? So, and I'll close there.
It was a combination of both.
Combination of both is right.
It's a combination of both. I went to our local university for a number of years, and then I joined the Air Force and became a military police officer. And then because of an opportunity that we had, the local police department came on our military base and was recruiting people for a specific assignment. And because I was from Tucson, I volunteered and transitioned into the police academy and was minding my own business, doing regular old patrol work and downtown Tucson. And one night I was taking down some barricades in the roadway and got run over by a drunk driver. They hit me head on and just severely injured me. And I was out of commission for a number of months. And then I was assigned to the gang unit as the intelligence officer. And people tell me all the time that that was not a coincidence. That was the creator that put me in that position to start working gangs. And I really had a lot of eye-opening experiences of working gangs, investigating violent crime, and working with loved ones of family members. And I just felt an attachment to them. And I felt that they expected and deserved justice. And that was my job. My job was to bring them justice and closure. And even though there was times that I was at odds with my department, because and I used to explain to my other detectives and officers is that the police department is not an entity. It's a badge. That's what you're working for, a badge, or you're working for a community. And if you work for a community, your community expects answers and they expect devotion. And it was my opinion that was my responsibility to my community, was to be devoted to them and to help them in any way possible, to help them with their investigations and do the very best that I possibly could. And that's pretty much what I did. I ended up with right around 400 cases. I had a 97% conviction rate. And I didn't take no for an answer. I just did not take no from answer from anyone. I didn't take no from answer from the judges, from the attorneys, from my commanders, because I felt that I was compelled to help this grieving family. and this grieving loved one to make sure that I did the very best to make sure that their case was solved. And I had an explanation to why their loved one life was taken and why their life was lost. So, and I had some really good experiences with these young people, these kids that were involved with gang activity. They were really there for me a lot of the times that other people weren't. So I felt that I owed that responsibility to them. And the funny thing is that though I didn't even want to become involved with law enforcement, my grandmother told us one time we were driving down the roadway, and there was a lady on the side of the road, and she had a flat tire, and there was a highway patrolman helping her fix the tire. And my grandmother said, "Stop the car." And she looked back at me and my brother and said, "You see that guy right there?" And we said, "Yeah." She goes, "One of you guys is going to do that. You're going to help the community." And I knew she was talking to me because my brother was a big dum-dum.
Yay for grandmothers.
Yes,
and
thank God for my grandmother.
I'm a great grandmother, so I'll
There
have
you
to
go.
remember that one for my grandchildren.
Yeah. So, and I really enjoy working with tribal communities because you see the impact. You really see the impact. And if you help them with a policy or a code or a resolution or a school policy or doing a training, it really does open eyes. I went to the tribal school and I did a presentation, and I have a presentation called "The Truth from the Streets," and it's an hour and a half, and they were quiet as church mice, and their mouths were wide open because I used my cases and I showed them examples of kids just like them that made the wrong decision and got in the car at the wrong time, disobeyed their parents, hung out with the wrong people. And I go from case investigation all the way to autopsy and let them know that, this was a very serious problem in tribal lands, that they need to really stay connected to their families and their traditional tribal culture too. The gang culture is not a real culture. It isn't. It's a transitory culture. It's here and it's gone, but the traditional tribal culture lasts forever. And kids need to understand that. So
you mentioned something about tribal communities. Hold on, I need to close some of my windows. I'm just wondering if you can go back and talk about maybe one of the solved missing Indigenous women or girls cases. We're almost out of time, but I know that you have a range of experience, including solving and finding Native women, and I want to give our viewers a sense of what some of that work is.
Yes, I'll give you a perfect example in closing. Her name was Jamie Taylor out of South Dakota. She was a Rosebud tribal member, and it's a great story. And she got into drug activity and subsequently had to go to a treatment center. And the family was really heavily involved with narcotics, and subsequently come to find out that Jamie's family sold her to a sex trafficker out of Mexico that was in the community at the time. And the trafficker went to her treatment center that was off tribal lands and kidnapped her and was driving her to Nuevo Leon, Texas. They were going to cross her at Nuevo Leon, Texas. And she managed to get a cell phone and text her caseworker. And her caseworker contacted me because I was working there at the time. And the only reason she contacted me is not because I'm this great detective. She contacted me because I'm the only one that spoke Spanish. So the person that was with Jamie trying to help her was a Spanish speaker, so they handed me the phone. So I started talking to her, and they told me that this guy was bad news. He was going to sell her, and that they were going to go to Mexico City and sell her there to a trafficking organization, international trafficking organization. So we got a ping from her phone in Laredo, Texas. And I remember I used to do training in Laredo, Texas, and I trained them on gang investigations. So I went to my office and I started going through all my business cards, and I found the sergeant's card that was at my training. So I contacted him. And I said, "Hey, this is what I got. Da, da, da. he says, what kind of car it is. We have some cameras set up at the border. And I says, well, if you see this car go by, and it was a VW Rabbit, a brand new VW Rabbit with Texas plates. And lo and behold, that night, about 2:30 in the morning, we got a call from this sergeant, and he says that car just crossed, and it's in Nuevo Leon, Mexico right now. So he said, I said, do you know anyone that can track the car? And he says, well, I have some federales, but federal law enforcement in Mexico is very corrupt. He said, but you're going to need money. So we started collecting funds from the tribe, and we came up with $10,000. And we went down there. And talked to this federal Mexican law enforcement officer, and they knew where the car was headed. It was going to Mexico City. And the roads out there are not like the roads here. There's just like asphalt and then dirt all the way through. So we knew the car was going to Mexico City. So he, used the money that we gave him to pay other people to keep an eye out. And subsequently, we found Jamie in Mexico City. And I contacted the Mexican consulate, and I told the American consulate, I said, we have a young lady that's a tribal member that is probably going to need some refuge. And they said, well, if you can get her to the American consulate and have her run through the gate, we'll take care of her until we can fly her back to Texas. So Jamie managed to grab another cell phone and tell us where she was at a building where they were housing about 15 other girls. And we had this federal Mexican officer. They ran to the house. They opened the van. All these guys ran in with guns. And they kept saying, Jamie, Jamie, Jamie. And then finally Jamie goes, here. And they grabbed her. And as soon as they grabbed her and took her in the van, a carload of the bad guys came. And they managed to get out of there before they were able to take Jamie into. And what they were doing was they were indoctrinating these girls. Jamie told us that every night there'd be like 5 or 10 men that would come in and sexually assault the girls repeatedly, just to indoctrinate them into prostitution. And that they were supposedly going to be sold to an international trafficking organization of businessmen from all across Europe that sexually assaulted and victimized these girls out of Mexico City, where it's not a crime, unfortunately. So we had them drive her to the Mexican consulate. She ran into the gate at the Mexican consulate. And then from there, we had her we paid to fly her to Dallas, Texas. We went to Dallas, Texas. We met her there, brought her back to Dallas. She didn't want to talk to anybody, and I don't blame her. And from Dallas, Texas, we took her back to Rosebud, and the program that she was working with her was very good with her. They took really good care of her. And subsequently, she ended up going to a 2-year college. And then from a 2-year college, she went to a university in South Dakota. And now she is a school counselor at a private high school in South Dakota. And keep in touch with her. So that's a good story. It ended up, but it was total coincidence, accident, sticking to it, using whatever resources we could find. And by the way, we did all that and without a police report, because nobody wanted to write the police report. The feds didn't want it. Tribal police didn't want it. And none of the other Chamberlain Police Department, which is where they took her from. Chamberlain Police Department said that's not our jurisdiction because she's a tribal. So we did all that work without a police report.
This has definitely been a lot to process. And, I go back to your note that you don't take no from an answer, even in your chain of command, which, seems like you carry a lot. And I want to turn it over to Lucy for our final closing. It's something that we frequently do when we're just wrapping up, is to ask guests this question. So go ahead, Lucy, take it away.
Thanks, Emily. So Chris, it sounds like you have a very intense job, and life experiences overall. And listening to you share your stories, I'm really curious to know what you do for self-care. What does your downtime look like?
I'm a golfer,
Okay.
and we rescue dogs.
Do you? How many dogs have
Yes.
you guys rescued to date?
My wife she told me the other day she's at about 1,200.
Oh.
Behind me, you see these doors right here? I have 12 dogs at the house.
So what do you do with them on your downtime?
We walk them, take them to the park, teach them not to fight with each other. We work with them with regards to basic commands and adopted. Try to get them adopted. Try to get them to. We take all the really rough cases. My dogs are all rescues, and they all have pretty hard luck stories. So I play golf, and then we rescue dogs. And they are a handful. You can one of them's barking right now just because I said that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate everything you've shared with us today, and I'm sure we'll get more questions, and we certainly have more to talk about with you here. We do want to give a war cry out to Jamie Taylor from the Rosebud, a Rosebud tribal member, solved case of Chris's, and a person, that is working in the community. We also want to give a war cry to those working in tribal communities and take on this notion of I won't take no for an answer, because the families need answers. And we also want to give a war cry to Chris's grandmother. What was your grandmother's name, Chris?
Her name was Rosie Barra.
Rosie Barra. We want to give a war cry to Rosie Barra.
Yep.
And if at any point during this session you need culturally appropriate advocacy or support, please contact Strong Hearts Native Hotline. It is 1-844-7-NATIVE. Again, it's 1-844-762-8483. Or you can chat online at strongheartshelpline.org. And that is a 24/7. You can contact them anytime. We do want to thank our live audience that's tuned in. It really helps us out with your live questions and just observations and watching and hanging out with us a bit. We did get some messages from people that were tuning in live saying it's a great interview so far. Again, we are a War Cry podcast. We are an Indigenous-led podcast surviving under the duress of colonization and intergenerational trauma towards self-determination. I'm Emily Washings. Thank you to co-hosts Robin Peebushy, Lucy Smartlowit, and Patricia Whitefoot. Thank you to our guest, Chris Cuestas from National Violence Prevention Resource Center. For credits, we have support from Native Women in Action, edited and produced by Robin Peebushy, music by Lee Sekakweptiwa, logo and shirts by John Olney Schellenberger, where you can also get your War Cry t-shirt merch. And again, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment. It really helps us out when you see that on social media and in the different subscription areas. Thank you very much.
Bring me back to your community.
And contact Chris to bring him to your community.